You know what's fascinating about human nature? We keep doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. We work harder at the same job, hoping for a promotion that never comes. We try the same approaches to our relationships, expecting them to magically improve. We use the same strategies to build wealth while staying broke year after year. Here's a question that might make you uncomfortable. When you look at your biggest problems right now, have you noticed that you keep trying to solve them the same way repeatedly? You stress more, you push through, you work harder, but somehow you end up right back where you started. Well, I'm about to share something with you that completely changed how I approach every challenge in life. I was sitting in my apartment at age 25, broke, confused, and wondering why nothing seemed to work out for me. I had tried everything I could think of to improve my situation, but every solution I came up with led me right back to where I started. That's when my mentor said something that hit me like a lightning bolt. Jim, the mind that created your problem can't solve it. At first I didn't understand what he meant. I thought to myself, what do you mean my mind created my problems? Bad luck created my problems. The economy created my problems. My boss created my problems. But as I sat there thinking about it, I began to realize something profound. Every decision that led me to that moment of desperation came from the same way of thinking. Every choice, every reaction, every response to life's challenges came from the same mental programming that got me into trouble in the first place. You see, most people think their problems come from outside circumstances. They blame the government, they blame their parents, they blame their education, they blame their luck. But here's what I learned that day. Your external world is nothing more than a reflection of your internal world. Your bank account is a reflection of your philosophy about money. Your relationships are a reflection of your philosophy about people. Your health is a reflection of your philosophy about taking care of yourself. The problem isn't what's happening to you. The problem is what's happening in you. And if you keep thinking the same thoughts, making the same decisions, and taking the same actions, you're going to keep getting the same results. That's not bad luck. That's not coincidence. That's the law of cause and effect working perfectly. Think about it this way. If you're lost in the woods and you keep walking in circles, the problem isn't the woods. The problem is your navigation system. You can blame the trees, you can blame the weather, you can blame the darkness, but until you get a new compass, you're going to keep walking in circles. Your mind is your compass, and if it's pointing you in the wrong direction, all the effort in the world won't get you where you want to go. Most people try to solve their problems with the same level of thinking that created them. They try harder instead of thinking differently. They work longer hours instead of working smarter. They look for more complex solutions instead of simpler ones. But here's what you need to understand. You can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. Let me give you an example. Say you're having money problems. You're always short on cash, always struggling to pay the bills, always worried about financial security. Most people in this situation try to solve the problem by working more hours, getting a second job, or cutting expenses to the bone. But those are all solutions that come from scarcity thinking. They come from the same mental programming that created the financial struggle in the first place. The person who created the money problem was someone who thought small, who focused on lack, who believed that money was hard to come by, and now that same person is trying to solve the problem. But you can't solve a scarcity problem with scarcity thinking. You can't solve a small thinking problem with more small thinking. Here's what happens when you try to solve problems with the same mind that created them. You get temporary fixes that create bigger problems. You might work more hours and make more money, but you sacrifice your health. You might cut expenses and save money, but you create stress and tension in your family. You're always playing defense instead of offense. You're always reacting instead of creating. The breakthrough comes when you realize that you need a new mind to solve old problems. You need to think like the person who has already solved the problem you're facing. You need to study success instead of studying failure. You need to focus on abundance instead of scarcity. You need to focus on possibilities instead of limitations. I remember when this concept finally clicked for me, I was complaining to my mentor about all my problems, and he said, "Jim, let me ask you something. Do you know anyone who has solved the problems you're facing?" I said, "Well, yes, I know several people who are financially successful." He said, "Good. Now let me ask you another question. Do those people think the same way you think?" I had to admit they didn't. They thought differently about money, about opportunity, about risk, about everything. That's when I realized I had been trying to solve rich people's problems with poor people's thinking. I had been trying to solve successful people's challenges with unsuccessful people's philosophy. It's like trying to speak French with an English vocabulary. It doesn't work. The breakthrough moment comes when you finally accept that your current level of thinking has reached its limit. This is often a humbling experience because it means admitting that what you've been doing isn't working. Most people resist this realization because their ego gets in the way. They say, "I've always done it this way," or "This is who I am," or "I can't change now." But here's what I learned. Your identity is not your limitation. The way you've always done things is not the way you have to keep doing things. Your past thinking patterns don't define your future possibilities. The moment you become willing to question your own thinking is the moment you open the door to breakthrough solutions. I've seen people stay stuck for decades because they couldn't let go of their attachment to being right about their old ways of thinking. They would rather be right and miserable than wrong and successful. But being right about limitations doesn't make you free. Being right about lack doesn't make you wealthy. Being right about why things can't work. The breakthrough requires intellectual humility. It requires saying, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe there's a better way. Maybe someone else has figured this out. This isn't weakness. This is wisdom. This is the beginning of real growth and lasting change. Your current thinking got you where you are today. If you're happy with where you are, then keep thinking the way you're thinking. But if you want to be somewhere else, if you want different results, if you want a better life, then you need to upgrade your thinking. You need to get a new mind. Now, some people hear this and they say, "But Jim, this is just how I think. This is my personality. This is who I am." But that's not true. The way you think is not who you are. The way you think is what you've learned. And anything you've learned, you can unlearn. Anything you've programmed, you can reprogram. Think about a computer. If your computer isn't working properly, you don't throw it away. You update the software. You install new programs. You debug the system. Your mind works the same way. If your mental software isn't producing the results you want, you need to update it. You need to install new programs. You need to debug your thinking. The first step is recognizing that your current thinking has limitations. This is hard for most people because we're emotionally attached to our thoughts. We think our thoughts are us, but your thoughts are just tools. And if your tools aren't working, you need better tools. I've met people who have been trying to solve the same problems for years using the same approach. They keep hoping that somehow this time will be different. But hope is not a strategy. Wishful thinking is not a plan. If you want different results, you need a different approach. And that starts with different thinking. Let me tell you about a man I knew who was struggling in business. He had tried everything he could think of to make his business profitable, but nothing worked. He was working 80 hours a week, cutting costs everywhere, pushing his employees harder, but his business kept struggling. Then he hired a consultant who had built several successful businesses. The consultant spent a week observing the business and then sat down with the owner. He said, "I can see why your business is struggling. You're thinking like an employee, not like a business owner. You're focused on working in the business instead of working on the business. You're thinking about cutting costs instead of increasing value. You're thinking about pushing people harder instead of inspiring them to perform better." The business owner was offended at first. He said, "I've been running this business for 10 years. I know what I'm doing." But the consultant said, "If you knew what you were doing, your business would be profitable. The fact that it's not profitable means you need to learn new ways of thinking about business." That was a turning point for the business owner. He realized that all his experience was experience in struggling. He was an expert at running a struggling business, but he had no experience running a successful business. To run a successful business, he needed to think like someone who had already done it. So he started studying successful business owners. He read their books. He went to their seminars. He hired coaches who had built successful businesses. And slowly but surely, his thinking began to change. He started thinking about creating value instead of cutting costs. He started thinking about systems instead of hard work. He started thinking about leadership instead of management. And you know what happened? His business started turning around. Not because he worked harder, but because he thought differently. Not because he got lucky, but because he upgraded his mental software. He solved his business problems by getting a new mind. This principle applies to every area of life. If you're having relationship problems, you need to think like someone who has great relationships. If you're having health problems, you need to think like someone who is healthy. If you're having career problems, you need to think like someone who is successful in their career. But here's what most people do instead. They ask other people who have the same problems for advice. They ask broke people for financial advice. They ask people in bad relationships for relationship advice. They ask unhealthy people for health advice. It's like asking someone who's lost for directions. If you want to solve your problems, you need to find people who have already solved similar problems and learn how they think. You need to study their philosophy, their approach, their mindset. You need to model their thinking patterns until they become your thinking patterns. Now, this doesn't mean you copy everything they do. What works for one person might not work for another, but the thinking patterns that create success are universal. The mental habits that create wealth are the same whether you're building a business, investing in real estate, or climbing the corporate ladder. The thinking patterns that create great relationships are the same whether you're married, single, or divorced. The mental habits that create health are the same whether you're 20 or 60. Success leaves clues, and those clues are in the thinking patterns of successful people. But changing your thinking isn't easy. Your current thinking patterns are comfortable. They're familiar. They're automatic. Changing them requires conscious effort and consistent practice. It's like learning a new language. At first it feels awkward and unnatural. You have to think about every word. But with practice, it becomes natural. The same is true with new thinking patterns. At first, thinking like a successful person feels fake. It feels like you're pretending. But that's normal. You're not pretending. You're practicing. You're rehearsing for your new life. I remember when I first started thinking like a wealthy person instead of a poor person. It felt strange to think about abundance instead of scarcity. It felt uncomfortable to think about opportunities instead of problems. It felt weird to think about what I could give instead of what I could get. But I kept practicing these new thought patterns. I kept reading books by wealthy people. I kept listening to successful people speak. I kept asking myself, how would a wealthy person think about this situation? And gradually, these new thinking patterns became natural. They became automatic. They became me. And as my thinking changed, my results changed. As I started thinking like a wealthy person, I started making decisions like a wealthy person. As I started making decisions like a wealthy person, I started getting results like a wealthy person. It wasn't magic, it wasn't luck. It was the natural consequence of upgrading my thinking. Here's something important to understand. You don't have to believe the new thinking patterns at first. You just have to practice them. Belief comes from evidence, and evidence comes from results. As you start getting better results from better thinking, you'll start believing in the new thinking patterns. Think of it like learning to drive. When you first get behind the wheel, you don't believe you can drive. You're scared, you're uncertain, but you practice anyway. You follow the instructions, you trust the process, and eventually you develop the skill and the confidence. The same is true with new thinking patterns. Another important point, you can't change your thinking by willpower alone. Willpower is limited. It runs out. You need to create an environment that supports your new thinking. You need to read the right books. You need to listen to the right audio programs. You need to spend time with the right people. Your environment is constantly programming your mind. If you're surrounded by negative people, you'll develop negative thinking patterns. If you're surrounded by limited people, you'll develop limited thinking patterns. If you're surrounded by excuse-making people, you'll develop excuse-making thinking patterns. But if you surround yourself with positive people, you'll develop positive thinking patterns. If you surround yourself with abundant people, you'll develop abundant thinking patterns. If you surround yourself with solution-oriented people, you'll develop solution-oriented thinking patterns. Here's a practical strategy that changed everything for me. I started carrying a small notebook, and every time I caught myself thinking like my old self, I would write down what a successful person would think instead. For example, when I thought, I can't afford that, I would write, how can I afford that? When I thought, that's impossible, I would write, how could that be possible? When I thought, I'm not smart enough, I would write, how can I become smart enough? This simple exercise forced me to challenge my automatic thinking patterns and replace them with empowering alternatives. At first, it felt mechanical and artificial. But after a few weeks, these new thought patterns started becoming automatic. I was literally rewiring my brain for success. Another powerful technique is what I call mental modeling. Find someone who's achieved what you want to achieve and study how they think. Read their books, listen to their interviews, watch their presentations. Pay attention not just to what they did, but how they thought about what they did. What questions did they ask themselves? How did they view obstacles? How did they define success? How did they handle failure? Then start asking yourself those same questions. Start viewing situations through their lens. Start responding to challenges the way they would respond. This isn't copying. This is learning. This is upgrading your mental software by installing proven programs. This is why it's so important to be careful about who you spend time with and what you put into your mind. Your mind is like a garden. Whatever you plant grows. If you plant seeds of limitation, you'll harvest limitation. If you plant seeds of possibility, you'll harvest possibility. Some people say, but Jim, I can't control my environment. I have to work with negative people. I have to live with limited people. That may be true, but you can still control what you put into your mind during your free time. You can still choose what books you read, what audio programs you listen to, what videos you watch. You can't always control what goes into your mind, but you can control what stays there. You can choose to focus on empowering thoughts instead of limiting thoughts. You can choose to focus on solutions instead of problems. You can choose to focus on possibilities instead of obstacles. Remember, the mind that created your problem can't solve it. But you can create a new mind. You can develop new thinking patterns. You can upgrade your mental software. And when you do, you'll be amazed at how quickly your problems start to solve themselves. It's not that the problems disappear. It's that you see them differently. You approach them differently. You respond to them differently. And because you think differently, you get different results. Let me give you a practical example. Say you're facing a financial challenge. The old you might think, I don't have enough money, there's nothing I can do. I'm stuck. But the new you thinks, this is an opportunity to get creative. What value can I create? Who can I serve? How can I solve this problem in a way that benefits everyone? Same situation, different thinking, different results. The person who thinks, I don't have enough money, will look for ways to cut expenses or work more hours. The person who thinks, this is an opportunity to create value, will look for ways to increase income or create new income streams. Which approach do you think will lead to better long-term results? Which approach do you think will lead to real financial freedom instead of just temporary relief? This is the power of upgrading your thinking. You don't just solve your current problems, you develop the mental capacity to solve bigger problems. You don't just improve your current situation, you develop the mental skills to create an even better situation. But here's what you need to understand. This process never ends. You never reach a point where you can stop growing mentally. Life will always present you with new challenges that require new thinking. The moment you stop upgrading your mind is the moment you start falling behind. Successful people understand this. They're always reading, always learning, always growing. They know that their success depends on their ability to think at higher and higher levels. They know that the thinking that got them to where they are won't necessarily get them to where they want to go. The beautiful thing about upgrading your thinking is that it gets easier with practice. The more you do it, the better you get at it. The more you challenge your old thinking patterns, the faster you can adopt new ones. The more you expose yourself to new ideas, the more creative you become. And here's something else that happens. You start to enjoy the process. You start to get excited about learning new ways to think. You start to look forward to challenges because you know there are opportunities to grow mentally. You start to see problems as puzzles to solve instead of burdens to carry. This is when life becomes really exciting. This is when you realize that there's no limit to what you can achieve because there's no limit to how much you can grow mentally. Every problem becomes a chance to level up. Every challenge becomes a chance to expand your thinking. So let me ask you this. What problem are you currently facing that you've been trying to solve with the same thinking that created it? What challenge are you dealing with that requires a new level of thinking? What situation in your life would change if you changed your approach to it? Whatever it is, I want you to understand that you have the power to solve it. You have the ability to upgrade your thinking. You have the capacity to develop a new mind. But you have to make the decision to do it. You have to commit to the process of mental growth. Don't wait for someone else to change your thinking for you. Don't wait for circumstances to force you to think differently. Take responsibility for your own mental development. Start today. Start now. Begin the process of creating a new mind that can solve the problems your old mind created. Read books by people who have solved similar problems. Listen to audio programs by successful people. Attend seminars and workshops. Find mentors who think at a higher level. Surround yourself with people who challenge your thinking and inspire you to grow. Most importantly, start thinking like the person you want to become instead of the person you've been. Start making decisions like someone who has already achieved what you want to achieve. Start responding to challenges like someone who has already overcome what you're facing. Remember, you are not your thoughts. You are the thinker of your thoughts. And as the thinker, you have the power to change your thoughts. You have the ability to choose different thoughts. You have the capacity to develop better thinking patterns. The mind that created your problem can't solve it. But you can create a new mind that can. You can develop new thinking patterns that will not only solve your current problems, but prevent similar problems in the future. You can upgrade your mental software so that you're operating from a higher level of consciousness. Let me share with you one final story that illustrates the power of this principle. I knew a woman who had been divorced 3 times. Each divorce was painful, and each time she swore she would never make the same mistakes again. But she kept attracting the same type of men and creating the same type of relationship problems. She was stuck in a pattern, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break. Finally, she realized that she needed to change not just her behavior, but her thinking about relationships. She started studying people who had successful long-term marriages. She read books about healthy relationships. She went to counseling to understand her own patterns. She worked on her own personal development before getting into another relationship. But most importantly, she changed how she thought about love, about men, about her own worth, about what she deserved. She stopped thinking like someone who attracted unhealthy relationships and started thinking like someone who attracted healthy ones. And you know what happened? Her next relationship was completely different. She married a wonderful man, and they've been happily married for over 20 years now. Same person, new thinking, completely different results. That's the power of upgrading your mind. That's what happens when you stop trying to solve problems with the same consciousness that created them. Here's what I want you to understand. Your current situation is not your final destination. Your past mistakes are not your future reality. Your present limitations are not your permanent boundaries. But the only way to transcend where you are is to transcend how you think. This is your opportunity. This is your chance. This is your moment to break free from the limitations of your old thinking and step into the possibilities of new thinking. Don't let it pass you by. Your future self is counting on the decisions you make today. Make the decision to grow. Make the decision to change. Make the decision to create a new mind for a new life. Start today by questioning one limiting belief you've held about yourself or your situation. Ask yourself, is this really true? Or is this just what I've been conditioned to believe? Then find someone who has succeeded in that area and study how they think about it differently. Model their thinking patterns until they become yours. Remember, success is not about working harder with the same thinking. Success is about thinking better so you can work smarter. It's about upgrading your mental software so you can run better programs. It's about becoming the kind of person who naturally creates the results you want instead of someone who struggles against their own limitation. The time is now. The opportunity is here. The power is within you. Use it. Transform your thinking and you'll transform your life. Stop trying to solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's thinking. Create a new mind for new solutions and watch as your life transforms in ways you never thought possible.